Well, another day, another lesson from Jesus that flips everything on its head. Jesus, here in this story, was invited to a meal at the house of a religious leader. And at the gathering, Jesus must have been observing the behaviors of the people there, and he noticed that guests were selecting places to sit based on whether that seat was a place of honor or not. And a biblical scholar explains what's going on here in this moment. He says, a dinner like this with guests was an occasion of social importance, where people's status and their rank in the community, in the village, were legitimated by their inclusion on the guest list and by where they sat. Additionally, with an invitation like this, some future favor was usually expected by the host. What a charade. And this charade isn't too foreign of a concept for us today. We too, and you've all been a part of them, we've all been a part of them, have occasions where seating placement says something socially about us. For instance, if you are seated at the head table or near the head table at a wedding reception, that indicates something of your status at the wedding. Or if you're an adult and you're relegated to the kids' table at a family gathering, it too says something about your status in the family. I hope my in-laws are listening to this sermon. As to invitees and expected favors, when one is invited, say, to a political or a university dinner, they're usually expected to provide some sort of support or donation. Dinners and expected favors are still common. So, friends, we're not so culturally far removed from the very scene in which Jesus finds himself. And when Jesus saw the guests, and he saw them playing this reputational musical chairs, vying for status and higher status positions, he thought he'd offer them a lesson. And he said, just go and sit down at the lowest place. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And then Jesus turns to the host, and he says, and when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, not just people from whom you can get something in return. Jesus was challenging status obsession while simultaneously advocating for inclusion of those whom the world rejects. And in so doing, he shows God's vision for the world that he keeps trying to enact. And that vision is for a world filled with humility and radical invitation. Two things that are both challenging and inspiring. For instance, the pursuit of not seeing ourselves as tied to social status and appearance. That is a challenge. It's unnatural, and it's certainly a check on our ego. But I also think it's relieving. Jesus' lesson here is a challenge, but I also think it's relieving. Because I think most of us would love to not care about what other people think. And here Jesus is offering an on-ramp into doing so. With this lesson, he reminds us that in God's dream, we would feel no need for competition of status and social positioning, because we're all paid the same in God's love and grace. There's something quite liberating about that. Many of us are daily plagued by worry about what status or image we project or have in the world. And here Jesus says, embrace not caring about that. Just take a seat at the low places even, at the kids' table. So with this lesson, he offers us not only a check on our ego, but he invites us to be free of superficial pressures and to do so by embracing humility. And man, do I hope that that sinks in. If not for you, then for me. To use God's goodness and love and acceptance to silence the soul-crushing question of what will people think? What will they think of us? That would be one of the most spiritual and emotionally liberating things I could imagine. And here Jesus is offering emancipation, reminding us, you're already invited. You're already included in God's banquet. So just take a seat. So this is all challenging and beautiful. And then Jesus goes even further. After the lesson in humility, he then turns to the host and he says, next time when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. And we've heard Christian maxims and lessons like this a lot, I'm sure. So sometimes maybe we get desensitized to how radical Jesus' guest list is here, how radical his imploration is. So a reminder of just how radical this line is, for him to have said it in public. One scholar emphasizes that those on Jesus' guest list in this ancient culture were expressly and explicitly forbidden from entry even into the greater community, much less a fancy dinner. For example, we have evidence of this. Here's a social ordering from an ancient text that expresses customs that would have been very well known in this time and place. It's from an ancient text called the Qumran. And in the Qumran, it says this: every person taken with impurities is unfit to occupy a place in the midst of the congregation. The paralyzed, the lame, the blind, the deaf, anybody with flesh that has a blemish visible, or any aged person that totters and is unable to stand, let these persons not enter the Qumran. And it was into this world where this was accepted social norm that Jesus is not only saying, let them enter, he's saying, give them places of honor. Jesus' guest list was and is revolutionary. And his lesson, therefore, compels us to evaluate whether or not we are as inviting as he calls us to be. Today's gospel passage and Jesus' lesson compels and requires us to ask of ourselves, would the people most rejected by society really feel welcomed here at First Lutheran Church in Detroit Lakes? Now, I think we do pretty well, and there's always room for improvement. So based on Jesus in this text, I still invite all of us here to really ask this question. Would the people most rejected and reviled by society, would they really, really feel welcomed here at First Lutheran Church in Detroit Lakes? Based on today's text, Jesus wants us to know. So, folks, social status and exclusivity might be virtues of this world, but they are not virtues for Jesus. humility, and radical hospitality are the virtues in God's kingdom. His radical hospitality in this text ought to cause us to trust in his grace and acceptance, relieving us from any need to vie for social position and to embrace humility. And his radical hospitality ought to stretch our invitation to those whom society rejects. On that, fellow honored guests, this is Jesus' dinner party lesson. You are beloved, already, now, and forever. So just take a seat anywhere. And when it comes to the guest list, invite whom Jesus would invite. Amen.